Welcome to the deep dive. You give us your sources, and we really try to pull out like all the important stuff. The knowledge and insights. So you can like be instantly smarter without feeling overwhelmed. So today we're diving deep into before you start up. It's how to prepare to make your first product a success, and it's by Pankaj Goyal, and this is all tailored just for you.
Yeah, so what's interesting about Goyle is he's not like the stereotypical startup success, He's an alumnus of IIT Kanpur and IM Bangalore, also has experience at McKinsey,
Yeah.
which, kind of screams like traditional success, right?
Yeah.
Yet his book focuses on like the mistakes he made before he even launched his venture. So he basically says like if he was like a mega hit, you would already know who he is. So his perspective is really practical, grounded in pre-launch realities. It's exactly.
Yeah.
And our focus in this deep dive is going to be on that like pre-startup preparation. So we're not going to be talking about, building your MVP, nailing your funding rounds, scaling to unicorn status. It's really about laying the groundwork. The part that most people forget about in the rush to like just start. And whether you're just thinking about a startup or actively planning your first steps or even like a few months in, I think you'll find some really valuable things here.
Yeah. Goyle structures this around several key pillars. So we're going to be exploring, how to really evaluate your business idea, choosing a co-founder, which is incredibly important, like the must-do steps right before you launch, and then how to manage your priorities in like those crucial early months.
Okay, so let's jump into that first crucial pillar, evaluating your business idea, because Goyle definitely like challenges that whole like just do it mentality.
He does, yeah. He starts off with like this kind of stark statistic from CB Insights, and that is there's a 90% chance of failure for startups.
Yeah, so it definitely makes you sit up and pay attention. And their research kind of identifies like 5 key recurring reasons behind these failures.
Right. So those 5 major themes were problems with the product.
Yeah.
Getting beaten by the competition.
Yeah.
Legal issues. Running out of cash. And a weak team. So let's start by digging into that first one. The product being the core problem.
Sure. The fundamental issue here is that you end up building something that doesn't actually solve like a real problem or offer genuine value,
Yeah.
To the people you want to be your customers.
Right.
So he uses the Segway as an example. Remember all the buzz around that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like I remember that inventor saying it was going to be as transformative as the car was to the horse and buggy.
Right. And it attracted a ton of venture capital. It was going to be like this revolutionary mode of transport in urban areas.
Yeah.
Yet in reality, it carved out a very niche market primarily for tourists.
Right.
Too fast for sidewalks, too slow for roads, no real storage. It just didn't fit into people's daily routines. So Goyle says that while like a problem might resonate with a small group, it doesn't necessarily translate to widespread demand. So a key insight for you here is don't just like identify a problem, but make sure that your solution actually aligns with like the existing infrastructure and habits of your target audience.
Right. And then he brings in Akshat Chowdhury, founder of BlogVault and ActiveMob, and he shares a story of how he built an SMS-based expense tracking app. And it solved the problem for him. But his target demographic, which was Gen Y, was just not interested in like tracking all their spending with text messages.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's not just about a problem existing, but people being willing to change their behavior to adopt your solution. Goyle touches on the examples of fitness trackers and healthy eating. We all know the benefits, but like consistently changing ingrained habits is a monumental challenge. So a key insight for you there is even with clear benefits, influencing shifts in customer behavior is incredibly difficult. So just consider how easily your solution fits into existing routines.
Right. And then Sangeet Paul Chowdhury from Platformation Labs offers this really interesting perspective. He focuses on like the risks associated with trying to productize purely intellectual capital. So even if your idea is great, will it actually reach the right audience?
Yeah.
And even if it does, will it translate to your business goals?
Yeah.
A lot of times there isn't really like a viable business model immediately apparent.
Right. And then moving on to the second major reason why startups fail is competition. And Goyle's very direct about this. He says almost no idea exists in a vacuum. Once you enter the market, you're going to face rivals. So the kingdom insight for you here is assume competition exists.
Right.
And like really analyze the landscape.
Yeah, and he gives some clear examples like Mint.com, which is a personal finance tool that was super successful, versus Wasabi, which was like a very similar product that ultimately didn't make it. And the difference, user experience. Mint just made it way easier to manage your finances.
Exactly. And then you have like the classic tech battles like Facebook's triumph over MySpace and Orkut. While Various factors played a role. A superior offering was a big difference.
Mhm.
But Goyle also highlights it's not just about having a better product. Resources matter. So Sidecar, the on-demand car service, they just couldn't compete with like the sheer financial firepower of Uber and Lyft.
Yeah, they were outfunded.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting because Cato, the business chat app, they just couldn't get enough traction to compete with Slack. I think their CEO famously said, Slack ate the world.
Yeah.
So having a great idea isn't enough. You have to be able to compete.
You have to be able to execute and have the resources.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the third significant pitfall is the legal system. So you could have a great product, but it could unintentionally like run up against regulations or existing laws. So the key insight for you here is that legal compliance isn't a secondary consideration. It needs to be like baked into your planning from the start.
Right. And he gives the example of HomeJoy. It was an online platform for home services.
Oh.
They were hit with a lot of lawsuits over whether their workers were employees or contractors.
Yeah.
And this made it impossible for them to raise funds, and ultimately they had to shut down.
Yeah. And then you have Ordrex. This was a restaurant technology company.
Yeah.
Had investment even from Google Ventures. They were forced to shut down because of like patent infringement lawsuits.
Wow.
So these legal battles can really drain your resources and impact team morale.
Right. Makes sense. So the fourth reason why startups fail is running out of cash. And Goyle really emphasizes that cash flow is the lifeblood of any business. So the key insight here is that you need to manage your cash really carefully, even if you're getting some initial traction.
Yeah, absolutely. He uses the example of Patterbuzz. They offered premium content, licensed content from over 50 magazines. They had thousands of articles published,
Wow.
but they just ran out of cash to keep going.
Wow.
They couldn't raise more money, so they had to shut down.
And this is interesting because Wardrobe Wake Up, a subscription fashion service, they even had a waiting list of 1,500 customers.
Yeah.
They had to cease operations because of lack of funding.
Right.
So even if there's strong initial interest, it's not enough if you don't have the capital.
Right. It's about the whole business working together and having a viable model. And I think Akshat Chaudhary's experience with ActiveMob kind of illustrates this.
Right.
While they gained popularity, the costs of sending all those SMSs was just too much.
Yeah.
They couldn't attract more investment because they didn't have a clear path to like a profitable model,
Right.
customer acquisition model. So this really underscores that relying solely on external funding to get customers without a viable business model is very risky.
Okay. So those were the 5 main reasons for startup failure. And now Goyle kind of pivots to the personal challenges that founders face.
Right.
And I think this is where things get really interesting
Mm-hmm.
because you don't always think about these things when you're dreaming of startup success.
Yeah, he kind of paints a very realistic picture. The first thing he talks about is your bank balance making you cringe.
Oh, yeah.
So he contrasts the experiences of 2 friends. So you have Arun, who launches a startup in Bangalore. Then you have Raj, who takes like this high-paying investment banking job in New York. A
Okay.
year later, their financial realities are starkly different. Raj is living comfortably. Arun is probably on a very tight budget.
Right. And Goyle poses some questions for you to consider here. How would you feel about constantly having to choose the cheapest option? Train versus flight,
Yeah,
public transport versus a taxi.
yeah.
What if you had to cut back on things like entertainment or eating out? Could you downgrade your car or even where you live?
Right, yeah. And the point is, if you're looking for a comfortable lifestyle early on, the startup path is probably not for you.
Yeah. He also emphasizes that your personal and social commitments will probably take a backseat. Startups demand 24/7 dedication.
Yeah.
Weekends and vacations become really rare. So Siddhartha Agrawal from Wallsoft Labs, even with a big initial client, he talks about this constant pressure of building his business.
Right, yeah. And it makes you think about like the impact on your long-term goals.
Mhm.
Like if you want to get married or start a family, when your future is so uncertain and your time is really consumed.
Yeah, big consideration.
Then there's the psychological toll.
Right.
The constant stress of a startup can lead to depression in some cases.
Yeah.
He quotes Neil Arora from Quantinsty, who talks about severe sleep deprivation during like critical phases.
Wow.
So starting a business can impact your mental well-being. You might question your abilities,
Mhm.
become overly critical, or even experience apathy.
Right. And then there are like the societal and family pressures,
Mhm.
especially in a culture like India where stable conventional careers are really valued.
Mhm.
So Goyle includes this very relatable Hindi dialogue. A mother expresses her worry about her son starting a business
Yeah.
and compares him to like the seemingly successful Sharmaji's son
Yeah.
who's working abroad.
Yeah.
So it highlights those external pressures that founders face.
Yeah. And he also briefly mentions that your career can be affected if your startup doesn't succeed,
Mm-hmm.
potentially making it harder to get a good position afterwards. And then he brings in this concept of the struggle. This is from Ben Horowitz's book,
Oh, yeah.
and he quotes it directly. And he says that it really speaks to those moments where, everything feels overwhelming, self-doubt creeps in, and, even basic things lose their appeal.
Sounds incredibly demanding.
Yeah.
But Goyal does say that these challenges can be anticipated
Yeah.
and prepared for.
Right.
The key is to understand them and mitigate those risks. So this leads us to, this fundamental question, the why behind starting up.
Exactly. And Goyal reflects on his own motivations, which he now recognizes as being somewhat superficial. Like sense of adventure. Better to fail than not try,
Yeah.
He says looking back, he hadn't really thought deeply enough.
And it's interesting because he outlines a whole range of motivations that drive people to start businesses. The desire for achievement, independence, wanting income security, recognition, establishing a legacy, dissatisfaction with their current job, wanting to create social impact.
Yeah.
And he uses an example from TVF QTAPA, a bunch of friends sitting in a bar, fueled by drinks and frustration with their jobs. They decide to start a company.
Yeah.
But he cautions against starting a venture for negative reasons, just to escape a bad boss.
Right.
And Akshat Chaudhary talks about how he had to do all sorts of things as a founder that were outside his comfort zone, like sales, hiring people for roles that he didn't have much experience in.
Yeah.
And Goyal says you still have bosses as a founder.
Right.
Your employees, investors, customers.
Yeah.
So ultimately, he stresses that having a strong why is the most sustainable driver. Like solving a real problem or creating a real impact. And he has these great quotes from several Indian entrepreneurs, like Sukrishnan Ganesan from Kannauder talks about the importance of the idea. Mohan Rajagopalan from Yap.io says it's about working on interesting and transformative challenges. Sangeet from Platformation Labs was driven by the intellectual challenge, analyzing industry shifts.
Right.
Suhani Mohan from Cyril Designs is addressing, this need for affordable menstrual hygiene.
Right.
Kunal Gandhi from Logic Roots is about making a positive impact on customers and employees. And Brinj Bhushan from Magic Pen, he's all about the excitement of building something impactful from scratch.
Right. And I think Sangeet also gives this great definition of passion. It's not just something that you enjoy, but something that you're willing to suffer for. Right. And then Goyal advises you to follow your effort to find your passions.
Right.
And he cautions against fleeting interests and, moving between problems. So he says, give an idea a week of serious consideration to see if you're really interested. And then set a realistic time frame to pursue it.
And what's interesting is he addresses the motivation of wanting to make a lot of money. He says if financial gain is your main driver, be honest with yourself and pursue opportunities that are inherently profitable, even if they aren't cool or problem-solving oriented.
Right. Yeah, and he also talks about imaginary worlds.
Yeah.
Which is basically this thought experiment. Imagine yourself in different scenarios, like solving a problem with no recognition,
Okay.
working as a freelancer,
Right.
accumulating wealth through stocks, or fulfilling your bucket list without any reward. And so this will help you understand your core motivations beyond money.
Right. I like that. And then he talks about patience. He says it's vital.
Yeah.
He mentions Kunal Gandhi's transition from the fast-paced world of consulting to the more gradual progress of a startup. And he gives examples of delays and frustrations. Developers leaving, hiring challenges, slow sales cycles, funding delays.
Right. The hamster wheel of entrepreneurship.
Right. And he reiterates that a startup is a marathon. You need a strong why to get through it. He warns against weak motivations like hating your boss or just wanting an adventure. He says, really understand what you want. Problem solving, independence, money, recognition. And know that there might be easier ways to get those.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this kind of leads us to the next stage, which is generating viable business ideas.
Right.
And Goyal acknowledges, that frustrating feeling of being in a dark zone, trying to come up with that elusive good idea. But he says that strong ideas aren't these random flashes of brilliance.
Yeah.
They're solutions to problems. And they emerge from your experiences and careful observation.
Wow.
So he uses his own personal need for push email over SMS in India as an example.
Yeah.
Recognizing that pain point.
Right. And then he contrasts the myth of the aha moment with reality. He uses the story of the Nike waffle iron shoe, pointing out that co-founder Bill Bowerman had actually spent almost a decade studying jogging techniques and experimenting with shoes before that moment.
Right. It's about the groundwork. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he goes into the 4 primary sources for business ideas. The first is problems that your friends or your family face in daily life. He says, actively listen to complaints in areas of dissatisfaction, like Warby Parker disrupted the eyewear market because they were just trying to solve that personal frustration of expensive glasses.
Exactly. And then the second source is problems that are being addressed in your area of interest or work.
Right.
He shares Stephen Koffer's experience. The frustrating vacation planning process led to TripAdvisor.
Okay.
And then he talks about entrepreneurship as a way to compensate for personal weaknesses,
Interesting.
referencing that HBR article on Mark Zuckerberg.
Right.
And he provides other examples too. Siddhartha Agrawal at Walsoft Labs identifying customer dissatisfaction. Chaya Jadhav at Virtual Mob recognizing the trend of AR gaming. You know the founders of Infosys. They left their software jobs to start their own venture. He says, adopt a customer-centric view in your job to uncover problems worth solving.
Okay. The third avenue for ideas is observing problems being solved in other parts of the world. So Goyal highlights the advantage of adapting a proven concept to your market.
Yeah.
Think of the global spread of fast food, clothing brands, Coca-Cola. He says that getting funding is often easier because you have proof of concept, like the Uber of India model. He mentioned Snapdeal's initial positioning as the Groupon of India, and Jumbo King getting inspired by McDonald's and Burger King.
Yeah.
He even notes the trend of innovation moving from east to west, like low-cost smartphones, cash on delivery.
Yeah.
So pay attention to global trends. And the fourth source is problems faced by companies that are like on the cutting edge, the latest trends.
Yeah.
He uses the gold rush analogy.
Right.
That businesses that provided tools and services to the gold miners actually made more money.
Exactly. Yeah.
He gives the example of Coda, India's hub for coaching centers. All the adjacent businesses that grew up, hostels, food vendors. He also talks about evolutionary versus revolutionary solutions, like Apple with the iPod and iPhone. They improved on existing products.
Right.
But Micromax offered cheaper smartphones. You think about the Indian software industry or Chinese manufacturing. These are all examples of disruption based on cost.
Yeah. So basically look for those opportunities to provide value in those emerging ecosystems.
Right. And Goyal really encourages you to talk to entrepreneurs and mentors to get ideas.
Yeah. And then we transition to actually evaluating the idea. And Goyal has his own template, which he contrasts with traditional investor-focused business plans.
Right. He's really critical of those traditional plans. He says they focus on big markets and tiny percentages over optimistic forecasts, and they neglect those initial challenges, like getting your first customers, day-to-day operations, even understanding your own motivation.
Yeah. So he offers this really grounded business plan evaluation template with 5 key questions. 1, can you identify and serve 100 customers profitably?
Okay.
2, can you get the cash to start? 3, can you get customers in a sustainable way? 4, can you execute? And 5, does this idea fit with your why?
I like how it's very simple and straightforward. So he's really emphasizing the building blocks here: the customers, the finances, the sales, your ability to get things done, and your connection to the venture.
Yeah. So let's dig into that first question. Can you identify and serve 100 customers profitably?
Okay.
And Goyal stresses that any business is about solving a problem for a customer. He says, forget about millions of users, focus on a small group, maybe 100, or even a single B2B customer. He says, think of Facebook, starting with college students, or Chaya Jadhav's Virtual Mob. They had clients right away because they started as an agency.
Right. And so the questions you need to answer are, can you describe the problem clearly? Is it a real pain point?
Yeah.
Is your solution actually better? Are they willing to pay? And at a price that works for you?
Right. So he uses the example of like needing a healthy juice for people who are busy.
Okay.
He says you have to make sure this is a real problem by talking to people and making a detailed profile of your ideal customer. Like, let's say your business is selling, high quality Western attire in Bangalore.
Great.
So your target might be women 25 to 35 working in IT with a certain income level. You need to actually talk to these women to understand their needs.
Right. Now, competition's a big thing here.
Yeah.
He says if you think there's no competition, you probably haven't looked hard enough.
Right.
Or maybe the problem isn't big enough.
Right.
He gives examples of competition in things like healthy juices, professional education, business attire. He mentions Suhani Mohan from Cyril Designs. She did all that primary research on menstrual hygiene in rural India.
Yeah. Great example.
Yeah.
So basically, he advises looking for big improvements over the competition, like in terms of the product, cost, customer experience, not just small advantages. So think of Google, Facebook, iPhone, low-cost airlines, Chinese manufacturers, Zappos. They all offered something significantly different.
Okay. So competition is not a bad thing. It means there's a market.
Exactly. It makes it easier to explain what you offer.
Right. But you have to make sure people are willing to pay, not just if it's free. Goyal talks about Tim Ferriss's micro tests, using ads to see if people will buy.
Right.
And Brij Bhushan from Magic Pen, he did these experiments on Facebook and WhatsApp to validate the idea of selfies for local discovery.
Interesting.
Yeah, and Goyal even suggests a simple test. Have a basic website with a pre-order button that leads to a signed web page.
Yeah.
And track those buy clicks. That's the key.
Right.
And he says do some back-of-the-envelope calculations to figure out profitability. But